Good afternoon and welcome. I am Reverend Cindy Grimes with the Center for Spiritual Living in Ocala, Florida, and I am so glad to be with you this afternoon, all of you that are joining us, and we have a really great program. I'm very excited. This has been a little while in the making, and as you know, some of you know, I was out with COVID for a bit, so things kept getting rescheduled and rescheduled, and anyway, now we are back, and again, I'm just really excited to be here and have you all here and our special guest. So let me start us off for those of you who may be first timers with us of who we are here at the Center for Spiritual Living. So, welcome. These are the values at the Center for Spiritual Living. This is something we voted on as an organization maybe 3 years ago or longer. It's probably time to relook at them. But you can tell a lot about an organization, about an individual, about anything by what it is that they value. And the first thing at the top of our list is spiritual growth and practice. And what we're going to be talking about today is a practice that I believe may be very useful to your spiritual growth. And so I'm excited, super excited to talk about that. We love to hear about new practices and things to help us grow spiritually. We value love here. We're all about love and light and acceptance. And the next value, which is appreciation. We value community. We value freedom, creativity, health and wholeness, generosity, and financial well-being. And our mission and vision is the same as the larger organization. Our mission at the Center for Spiritual Living Ocala is to provide spiritual tools for personal and global transformation. As I said, we are just one Center for Spiritual Living out of several hundred that are located throughout North America and the rest of the world. And that's what we're here to do, is to provide people with the spiritual tools to transform their lives and their world. And our purpose is to awaken humanity to its spiritual magnificence, meaning we know, we believe that every one of us is a spiritual being that's meant to shine and to express. And our purpose is to help people do that to the best of our ability and to the best of their potential. And our vision is a world that works for everyone. And so I have one of my team members is going to join us. Y'all probably know Donna Davis. Let me bring Donna into the stream. Hey, girl.
Hey, hi everybody.
How you doing, Donna?
I am blessed always.
Yes.
I'm doing
So we
great.
saw the message that you have left the Keys and on your way back home ahead of the storm or whatever might be coming.
Yeah, I don't think the storm's going to really affect them very much, but
Mhm.
it was time for us to just kind of transition out of the Department of Health and allow for that staff to take over those jobs and be able to keep it going, because it's now a new way of living and all that contact tracing, all of that needs to happen on a regular basis so that people are aware so they can protect themselves and their loved ones. So, it was very important work, and I'm very glad I was able to be in front of this disorder as opposed to
Yeah.
being at the very end trying to, combat it this way. If I can get in front of it and keep people from getting sick in the first place, then yay, I was completely
Right.
and it's beautiful there.
Yes. For anybody who doesn't know, Donna and her wife Norma have been on the front lines of COVID in New York City, but just most recently down in the Keys, and they're finally on their way home to their new home in Ocala. And we're so excited that you're coming home. Yay!
Me too. I'm very excited to just really start our vision and our mission and be able to really branch out as your phoenix is rising. And I'm so ridiculously honored and grateful to everybody for all the support and love through this entire adventure.
Yeah, it's been an adventure. I've
Hmm.
just been like, witnessing it, watching, but it's been a heck of an adventure.
Yeah.
So let's make sure we can hear you. You're nice and close to whatever microphone, because you were a little garbled there, I thought.
Okay. All right.
So anyway, I'm
Can
going
you
to
hear
turn
me
it
better?
over. I hear you better. And I think we're going to turn it over to you so you can do our prayer, our invocation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so grateful to be able to be used in this way as an instrument for spirit to come forward and to speak as spirit speaks to spirit. So at this moment, I invite you now to get relaxed in your chair, sit up nice and tall, and just prepare yourself to drop into the allness. I take you on this journey called the spiritual mind treatment, which is just a training of the mind to recognize the truth of being, of the oneness. As we do this in 5 steps in affirmation, and we start by saying, I recognize the allness of the one. I know that this one force lives, move in and around and through all things that ever existed and will ever exist. But this one source I call God is intelligent, it is magnificent, it is not contained by any mind, but is a part of everything. And because that is true, then it is a part of the space that I sit in right now. I am sitting in that oneness. I am pulsating within that oneness. And when I allow myself to align to that oneness, then I know this is true for myself. When I sit in this space, I'm able to connect to it all. And spirit downloads and feeds information through me and out my hand and out my voice. And as I speak spirit to spirit, when we connect to that allness, we become aware of its presence. We become aware of our interconnection with it. So today, I'm grateful knowing that Barkley is teaching us the spiritual tool of journaling, a way to bring that which is wanting to be said from spirit through our hands and onto paper. And then when we open our eyes and step back into our story, back into our humanity, we're then able to take that little nugget of truth and then allow us to be the representation of spirit in human form. I'm grateful for this wonderful way of teaching and of knowing. I am grateful for that tool that Barkley so wonderfully shares with us today. I know that everything that needs to be said is said, and that hearts are open and fully embraced into their own knowingness. And I release this into the law because the law is that fertile soil that allows everything to grow without effort on my part. And I release it into the law knowing it's already done, and so it is.
Namaste, Donna. What a beautiful prayer. Thank you. You could just do that all the time.
I love it.
And I want to remind people, I don't know, for those that may not have gotten our newsletter or aren't on our mailing list, that the Big Sky Retreat,
Yeah.
the little mini kind of teaser for the retreat for 2021 is happening not next weekend, but the weekend after, first weekend of September. And you are doing the invocation for that event as well.
I am. Big Sky is like, is it John Moore that says it's like one big old hug? So we won't have the mountain, but we can hug each other virtually. So I'm excited about that.
Yes, yeah, we have a little blip for this year for 2020, but going back to Big Sky for 2021, and this is kind of the teaser, right? I'm supposed to be a speaker next year, so hopefully all of that continues on, and I'll
What?
be
Yes.
yes for
Yes.
2021. So anyway, be on the lookout for that. We'll post that on the Facebook page, and we'll send out the links for people to check that out. It's quite an
So
event, isn't
cool.
it, Donna?
Oh my gosh, because it's new thought. People from different new thought genres that come together and worship together and learn together, and they have the most wonderful speakers. And look at this, now they know. They know. Best
Yeah.
speaker ever, and now they have her. So I'm
We
excited.
laugh too. We laugh and we sing and we play and we go out and journey. It's right near Yellowstone,
Yeah.
so there's all kinds of places to play. It's just beautiful. So anyway, just a teaser for next year. And
Yes.
to know your phoenix is rising, 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 rising.
Absolutely. It's going to really start taking off, and you guys are going to see us soaring. So be on the lookout. We got some great stuff in store.
All right, girl. Give my love to Norma and Deb and Tasha, and we will see you back soon.
All right.
Safe
Bye.
travels.
Thank
Love
you.
you.
Hey, y'all.
All right. So, my guest today is Dr. Barkley Braden. She is a former teacher, she is a psychologist, she is a writer, and she is a journal keeper, has been for many, many years. And I'm so excited because she's going to share all about her journey. I got to read some of it. I've known Barkley more as acquaintances, I would say, over the years. She is a dear, dear heart and just a considerate, loving, beautiful person who has reached out to me many times over the years and just offered encouragement and support. And I'm just so excited to help her share her message today and just clue you into another person in my world, another one of these amazing people that's had an amazing journey and a heart of service and a desire to share. And so let me bring her on in. Barkley, namaste.
Namaste.
So awesome.
I'm just brimming with gratitude. We haven't even we have gotten started. I had hoped that Donna might be able to do the invocation prayer for me, and I'd meant to ask if that's possible, and I forgot. And then there she is in her glory. It was really wonderful.
There it is. There it is. Isn't that awesome?
Thank you for your introduction.
Oh, I'm so excited, and the more I got to know about you, the more excited I was to share, and to have you tell your story for us. So I thought we'd just kind of go from the beginning. And, a lot of this is available on your website, also in your book,
Thank you.
which I love. So, so I want to say I saw that you started life, and I don't know how idyllic it was, but in rural Northern California, which is just so breathtakingly beautiful. I was there this time of year last year at Asilomar, and it's just such a gorgeous place. And to read that you grew up on a farm, and being up in your treehouse reading your books, and to have that life and go from there, Stanford University, right, graduating school, and then ending up in New York City as a school teacher in Harlem. And like, wow. And what kind of went from there? It's just like incredible to me. And I'd love to hear some of that, some of that journey from you, what that was like. So also before I have you talk, I want to say something else, like to set it up, that for our theme for the year, I think I shared with you, is about releasing what doesn't serve us, right? The belief systems, AKA BS, as we become more awakened to, our purpose and what we're here to do in this life. If you could kind of think about it, like what was some of the BS that you went from that life in California to winding up in Harlem, right? What belief systems maybe served you and what didn't, and what it took to get you there. So I'll turn it over now.
Well, there were a lot of chapters from my birth in the San Joaquin Valley, Stockton, which makes the worst list these days for difficulties. It was fun when I was there until I was 10. And then my father went into business in Colusa, California. And we ended up moving into a rental house where we lived for years and years, right in the middle of a prune and walnut orchard. So it was pretty just beautiful. It was the dissonance for me at age 10 was that there'd be a whole influx of bracero workers from Mexico to help harvest. And they lived in very bad conditions in the orchards right around where we were. So it wasn't without challenges. I mean, I didn't quite know how to make sense of it at age 10. I saved up my money and I bought a little gift for one of the kids I'd made friends with. But it was challenging. Anyway, I was in this situation and in a public school until my junior year in high school. I had the privilege of going away to a Catholic girls boarding school in Monterey, California, which is so it's from the hot Central Valley to the cold, foggy coastline. And you were at Asilomar, which would have been right around the corner from Monterey.
Mhm.
And it's like a different world in some ways. Then from there, I went to Stanford, and from there, I was supposed to go teach French, or I'd signed up to go teach French in the Peace Corps in Ghana in Africa, West Africa. And I did my Peace Corps training at UC Berkeley summer after I graduated, and I ended up, I don't know whether you'd call it chickening out or changing direction. In any case, at the end of that summer, I decided to get married to a long-term sweetheart, my first marriage, instead of going off to teach French in Ghana. And so my life veered at that point to New York City. And when I got to New York City, once I finished writing my thank you notes, which is the title of my next book, Thank You Note. Once I finished writing my thank you notes, it was sort of like, well, what do I do from here? And I think there was this kind of void of a possibility that I want to talk about in terms of changing my belief system. It doesn't quite go from believing one thing into getting rid of it and believing something else. You can look at it that way, but the biggest thing for me was that being female and coming of age in the early 60s, I say early before the women's movement and before the civil unrest, there was no trajectory for life after college. If you're fortunate enough to get to college, so what, and here you were at this incredible place with amazing people. And yet I don't remember, maybe just 2 or 3 women I knew who had any kind of career thoughts at all. I certainly didn't. And it was not like we thought of it as a vacuum. It was a vacuum, but we didn't even know it. So I think in some ways that was the BS that I had to somehow get out of in order to think about, well, gee, what good I do. And I mean, there was just this assumption, oh, you'll get married and, have children and all of that. And so there I was in New York, a young bride. My husband was going to law school at Columbia. So I was home in this little sublet apartment getting depressed, living on about $20 a week, parsing out the hot dogs across the week. And, so were the seeds planted then? Finally, I had been a French major. And so I finally decided, well, I could teach French somewhere. Private schools don't have requirements about getting credentialed or anything. So I started visiting, calling up schools, looked in the yellow pages, called up schools, private schools, made appointments when I could. And I ended up at this wonderful school, visiting a wonderful school called New Lincoln. And it had been founded in the heyday of progressive education, and it had all kinds of wonderful ideas. And I went to visit and got into conversation there with another teacher, and Bob Livingston talked about this program he had done at New York University that was designed for liberal arts graduates. It was kind of like an MAT program who'd never had any undergraduate ed courses and wanted to go into teaching. So that was turned out to be my next step. And I ended up graduating from there about a year later with full of ideas and ideals and eager to change the world. And my first teaching assignment was at a public school in Harlem. I've talked to you a little bit about it, and I won't spend too much time on it. It was very challenging. And it was not just because there were no textbooks or materials or anything like that, but there was an actual restrictive sense from the powers that be, the administration, as far as trying anything new. I've finally gotten paperback atlases in my class one day, and the kids were sitting around the tables, had them push their tables together so it felt like little committees, and we were looking at the atlases, and I felt like finally I'm having a teachable moment. And one little kid had just raised his hand and said, my name at that point was Daly. Mrs. Daly, where's Vietnam? So it was like, oh, goody. You know, we were all set to plunge in, and in walks the assistant principal. And in front of the kid says, Mrs. Daly, these children should not be working in committees. And the implication was that they weren't able. And I won't linger there because it's not really what we're talking this morning, but
Right.
it was a long journey to sort of figure out that I did not want to be teaching forever. I did teach only one. I lasted a year in that school, and then I taught for several years at New Lincoln, the school that I'd first visited, with 10-year-old children, which to this day I treasure that experience. It was really wonderful.
Yeah.
But again, I still was back to the larger theme. I still was struggling to legitimize having a dream for myself beyond what I managed to put together. And I finally, after struggling and getting depressed and moving away and realized that it wasn't too late. I was almost 30 and it felt like I was too late to start something, but I finally gave myself permission through a therapist who also helped give me permission to think what I might really want to do with my life. And that's when I thought about becoming a psychologist.
Yeah.
So that took about 10 years to do that. So basically most of my 30s were still in New York, becoming a psychologist. And it was a marvelous experience. But during that whole time, I had no particular spiritual inclination or curiosity. And in my later 30s, I started feeling like something was missing. You know, this is not, I don't know, this is again an example of having to enlarge my mindset into new possibilities. I think I just sort of let my spiritual interests from earlier years slip away and it sort of adopted the secular worldview. Anyway, it was gradual.
Right. Well, you were in the world of academia, right? So you leave teaching. Now you're going to become a psychologist.
Psychologist, therapist.
NYU for that. And I mean, it's got to be a very left brain kind of world, right? It's logic, it's reason, it's it's all of that academia, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very, very left brain.
Yeah.
And
you're also a clinician. I saw that you were like in all kinds of settings, right? From from lockdown, like the most traumatized, the most difficult kind of cases,
right.
Like all of like a whole gamut. Yeah.
Right. The South Bronx.
Right.
Yeah, that's more story, but I won't go there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I having been both places, I was raised in New York, and like in my early years in New York City, and I love Northern California and Monterey, and just to think such different worlds that you navigated in, and I guess my question, I don't know, what gave you the confidence, the belief that you could do all of that? Or was it not really a conscious thing? You just did the next thing in front of you. What was that like?
Yeah, I think it happened one step at a time. It's a good question, but I think it just happened one step at a time, or one circumstance at a time, choosing not to go into the Peace Corps. So then I'm getting married, and then I'm living in a little apartment, and then, I have to work. So figuring out the teaching, and then taking a break from that and kind of going down into another trough and figuring out, well, gee, I could become something, and what would that be? And so once, you sort of, then once you're in graduate school, it's kind of laid out, what you do next. So
yeah,
I don't know what your next question.
Okay, no. So then you're a psychologist. Now you've moved from New York City, right? Did you move to Massachusetts?
Yes. So I moved to, and kind of typical of the era. It wasn't a career move. It was a romance move. I was finishing up my doctorate and starting to feel this pull that I didn't have words for. It was a spiritual pull, but I didn't know it yet. And the person I had the romance with had an active spiritual life. And he was a transplanted New Yorker, lived in the Berkshires. He was a dean of a law school in the vicinity. And he was an active member of a Jewish community that I had sort of peripheral opportunities to be involved with. And the one I remember most was a celebration of the harvest, the Sukkot ceremony in the fall. And we were all outside on this big mountain in the Berkshires with in a circle, welcoming the harvest and acknowledging spiritual feeling, and in a group. And there was something so stirring about it all that I think I was in love with that part of things as much as I was with the person I'd moved to the Berkshires to be with.
Right.
But anyway, that's where my career got launched. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that relationship didn't turn out to be a lasting one. But I did meet my husband, who's still my husband, my dear husband, Richard, a psychologist. And so I was starting my private practice. First I worked in a clinic and then starting my private practice. And I was starting to feel all these nudges in the direction of my spirituality. And I talk about these little steps I took in my book, Faith at Hand. And in taking all these little steps, I ended up becoming a journal keeper, something I never thought I could do. It was something my friends did, certain friends did, or authors I admired. I'd read all of Anne Morrow Lindbergh's journals. I'd read all of May Sarton's journals, among others. And but I never thought something I could do. I guess so. That's BS, right? A belief system problem.
Right. Yeah.
You can do it. And my hope is that people listening today will take that step into journaling. Journaling is wonderful. And then you go even farther with depth journaling. Maybe this is the time to tell people what it is.
Yeah, this is good. So you're I don't think you realize yourself what a trailblazer you are. Standing, always on the edge of the next thing. Like, just how many young women would be in New York City doing what you were doing and then taking the next step, whether it was for romance or whatever, you were still willing to keep doing the next step and the next step. So I guess yeah. And so this process that came to you, can you tell us a little bit about that?
It came because I think as I allowed myself to become more actively interested in spiritual things or dimensions, I let myself go to a conference on psychology and spirituality, which was held at a fairly nearby Sufi center in New Lebanon, New York. And it was a legitimizing experience in terms of bringing those two parts of myself together, spiritual and psychologist, and I had, when I saw the ad for the conference, it was like, whoa, who would have thought of that? If I just stayed in California, I would have had plenty of that. But going through the more academic route in the Berkshires, I hadn't anyway, or New York City and then the Berkshires. So I became more curious. I allowed that to happen. I had started having some Reiki sessions, and they were life-changing in themselves. And I started getting interested in what I later to talk about was the convergence of psychological experience and spiritual experience. That feeling you get when you're still and you're turning inward and you're becoming aware of emotions and feelings and energies and deeper messages. So that, in a sense, became an acknowledged pull from that point forward. And what sort of took me ahead step by step, so I became interested, I think, through the oracle process. And I would encourage anybody with an oracle mindset, as a child, it had been the big 8 ball, looking what answer is going to move into view. But later it was through this Reiki practitioner and a spiritual teacher for me, Casey is what I call her in the book. I learned about runes and about angel cards, and how you can ask a question about your life if you're confused, and you get a simplified way of looking at it and a mantra to hang on to. And so it was through those kinds of processes that I started taking notes on what I was asking and what I was receiving. Mm-hmm. And I think that in a way is the template then for the later depth journaling process and asking, receiving process. Let me pause there to see if everything's clear up to this point.
Yeah, so I want people to get an understanding or maybe an appreciation for the very different worlds that these two things represent, right? And what you had to overcome, or to be able to fully embrace that. When you come from that world of academia, right, and now suddenly you're looking at runes or angel cards, like, how did those things gel? And did you have to be out of that world a little bit in order to be able to embrace it fully? Like,
good question.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think one thing that helped me was that I ended up being a solo practitioner in the Berkshires in Williamstown, Massachusetts, instead of following an academic postgraduate track in New York City, which would have been a natural thing for me to do. So it was sort of like I got away from any peer group pressure or scaffolding, ladder climbing pressure, and then I left. I worked for several years in a clinic, but then I started my private practice. So I was on my own, and it was kind of like I could do whatever I wanted. And it was that kind of freedom. I didn't have to go to meetings. I didn't have to deal with colleagues. I could just have the pure I-thou experience, being with another person in a recurring way across the day. And it was amazingly meaningful. In itself, it had a spiritual quality, whether that was ever said or acknowledged. And as I became interested in this convergence of psychological and spiritual experience, I also became committed to the idea that if people came into my office with a belief system and they wanted to draw upon that in their therapy, I made a decision that I would support that. It was nothing it was not part of my training to support that I had to kind of make that choice. And again, I didn't want to be seen as fringy or woo-woo or all that stuff. So it became very clear to me that how could I not bring in somebody's spiritual belief system into this? So meanwhile, I was having my own private life and not talking about that in my therapy with people. But along the way, I became more and more interested in writing and getting the answers and so forth. And I also became a student of A Course in Miracles, which I adhered to for at least a year, morning after morning. And then I was in a study group. And it was thanks to my that study group that I discovered Science of Mind, because someone in my group was a subscriber. There are no communities in the Williamstown area, at least then there weren't. There may be now. So she would bring in her old Science of Mind magazines, and I would take a couple home with me, and I just started reading through, and I loved the slogan on the front, which in those days was "Change your thinking, change your life," because that just felt like that's what, as a psychologist, I was dedicated to helping people change their thinking so they could change their life. And so it seemed like the perfect blend of perspectives. And in a sense, I would say, reading Science of Mind for a lot of years before I moved to Florida and found Oak Brook Center for Spiritual Living and met you, and before that, Reverend Peggy, and all those wonderful things. I had found my way through the magazine. Where I learned about it.
Right. And then we met, the IONS group was another thing, the Institute
That's
for
right.
Noetic Sciences.
Right. And that I had learned about the Institute of Noetic Sciences. IONS is the acronym, Institute of Noetic Sciences. It's a research organization in California it's founded by Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut that went to the moon and had a spiritual experience. And anyway, that whole interest in bringing spirit and research together,
Right.
I had learned about, and I've been able to talk about that with certain clients that were interested. And when I discovered, so also through my Course in Miracles group is how I discovered this other handwriting, and that's the basis of depth journaling, is asking a question with your regular hand and answering it with your non-dominant hand. It's like a talking to and a listening within experience. And some visitor to our group, she wasn't even a regular, she was just there one time, told us about it, and I went home and tried it. And that I talk about in my book. It's all there. I talk about it on my website, and if you're curious, you can find out about it lots of different ways. And so that's when I really started keeping a journal, is after I started doing that. And you're putting up I
did. I'm showing them a picture of your cover, your book cover.
Yeah, that's the book. And Faith at Hand is a reference to finding spiritual wisdom within through the other hand. And if you look carefully on the cover, you see it says, "Dear Child." And the first time I did this exercise, I didn't know who I was writing to yet. She hadn't said, "Call me Faith," but right away she called me Child and has continued to do so. So whenever I start, it's almost like a little kid doing "Dear Diary," and it's "Dear Faith," and then she always writes back "Dear Child" or "Dear Barclay Child" or something like that.
Oh, that's all. How many years have you been doing this now as a practice?
Good question. Since around 1990. So
Wow.
That's going on 30 years. It was fun to kind of go through some journals today in case I needed them. I had some, and I'm hoping to say, I don't know how much more time we have, but I'm hoping to say enough about the process itself to encourage people to give it a try.
Well, go for it. Go ahead. You got it. Tell us about the process.
Okay. Well, so I started keeping notes in a big envelope because I didn't think of myself as a journal keeper yet. So I just had a big manila folder envelope that I just write some stuff down, ask my questions, pull a rune, pull an angel card. Sometimes they say just the same thing together. That was kind of thrilling. There's some runes, and then there's some angel cards. So it's fun to use them together because they can give you cross confirmation. Sometimes I would ask my question and then I'd pull a card or pull a rune or look at the daily lesson for Science of Mind, and they'd all three maybe have some key word in common. So I started to get a feeling of what I would call spiritual accompaniment that was just so precious. And then sometimes it would just like strike gold and I would start crying, weeping. And it was so moving and precious that I just wanted more of it. So I was getting addicted probably on a lot of levels. I always loved paper and writing words and making words out of letters, and it's from the time I was a little kid. But so this had that quality about it. And then eventually I started making journals for myself. Here's an example of one. Now, at that point, it was before Oprah had made journal keeping so popular. It was before Julia Cameron had talked about the fabulous benefits of morning pages. And so there weren't a lot of just nice plain journals on the market. And I like a spiral back so it'll stay open. And so this is basically, if you peek under the edge of this, I'm not sure I can show you easily, but this is just a kid's copybook that I put a cover on, and then I put a little watercolor doodle on it. It's a carp for carpe diem. And so I have decorated, and it's fun to decorate your journals. This is one that, whoops.
Nice.
I don't know whether you can see the word wonder and gratitude in that watercolor doodle. It's fun to put something on the cover of your journal that has personal meaning to you. And then it's fun to, like this one inside, says carpe diem, and it has a big watercolor doodle. It's fun to just add a little watercolor to a page so that it can look like that. This, by the way, this is how the other path, or how the other handwriting looks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very nice. I have a
my
page.
own writing is right above that, and there's an example. That's me being careful, and it's looking really good. But my own writing is actually harder to read than my careful other hand writing. Here's an example of it's on the top. Thank you, Faith, and then I go into my question. So questions are really important. I mean, I feel like different messages have come through again and again over these years. One of which is asking, and asking you shall receive, asking and trusting and allowing. Those are probably three of the biggest words. And I guess it doesn't quite fit here, but I just wanted to say that one thing I did for a long time before I did these, or in between maybe, these big journals, is I would just, as I said, collect my notes and put them in a big envelope. So that's one way. If you're not ready to start, just get a big envelope. Then another thing I did for a long time is I don't know if you can see this well enough, but this is an old copy of Science of Mind. And then I would just, have blank paper that was as much as I needed for that month. And I often blended in reading the guide for the day and listening within, or just writing whatever I felt like and getting a response. And then at the end of the month, or during the month, I would just tuck it into that month. And I just have stacks of these. Along the way, I realized that I was not drawn to reread what I had written on those pages nearly as much as I was drawn to read something from a journal. So I offer that only because it has meaning to me now to reread the journals themselves. And someone asked me recently, a dear cousin and friend asked me recently, well, what are you going to do with all your journals? And I'm sort of alternate between burning them like a sand painting and digitalizing them for some archive, so we'll see what actually happens. But that's a good place to pause. I'm talking way more. I thought we'd be going back and forth more. But
no, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's a great process. I have done it from time to time, journaling. I usually do it when I'm going through something. It helps me to work through different situations. And those, I would say, are the journals that I would burn. Seeing some of what I've written in some of those journals, but it's a very, very useful and very helpful process. And the way you describe it is particularly useful in writing with the non-dominant hand, although it takes a little while to get used to that.
Yeah, it does.
Mm-hmm.
You can't worry about doing it well. You have to just forget about neatness.
Right.
I think there's psychological validity to what psychologists would be apt to call catharsis, or something being cathartic, which is what you do when something's really eating at you or bothering you or disturbing your peace of mind, doing what some people call a brain dump or a mind spill, or just getting it out. So that's often when I'm drawn to write, is when I'm going through something and it's just bothering me, getting it all out. And if I just stop there, it would be wonderful. But then adding in, finishing it off with a question, that's some of the asking, and then switching hands and seeing what comes, that always changes my perspective. So I think it's about all these factors that I've listed out. But then when I write to a different part of my brain or a different part of my being, I get a larger perspective I think that's what fits most with the spiritual growth and practice mission that you have as a center and as an organization, is that in a sense you're leading yourself with your inner wisdom or the divine that's in us. You're leading yourself or allowing yourself to be led to a new perspective, and I think that's what's growthful.
Yeah, I love that. And back to yourself. We're taught so much that the experts are outside of us, that we need to go to somebody else for our answers. And what I love about your process is it brings it back to the personal, like, who knows better than I do what decision I need to make, right? Who knows better than you about your path? So why not ask the expert of your own life?
That's beautiful, Cindy. I love it.
Yeah, that's what I love about this process. It's just, and not to say that the other isn't valuable, because you're an example of that, right? As a therapist, people come to you with their questions, and
I'm a listener. Yeah.
Right, as a therapist, that was your goal, was to lead them to their own answers, and this is just another layer of that. Where we get to be our own, not therapist, but witness, I suppose, or I don't know. You may have a better word.
It kind of depends on how you like to conceptualize it. I did share the tool with certain clients that were already journal keepers, because I felt like it would be an enhancement of what they were already doing, and I wasn't introducing anything that was too much me. And one person wrote to her wiser self. One person wrote to a being she called God, Mother. It was very important for her to have a feminine vision of the divine. Someone else ended up writing to her child self. So there's lots of different ways to take it, lots of different directions to take it. But again, I kind of liked the idea that it was a little bit inside and a little bit outside. I felt like that was one of the questions that someone might ask me as a client. Was this coming from me, or is it? So I ended up feeling personally as if it were sort of like part fairy godmother, part guardian angel, part outside. You want it. I wanted it to be a little bit outside of what I thought were my own limitations, and then the rest of it felt like, oh well, it is coming from within me. Sure. And that's the most spiritual way of looking at it.
Yeah.
This is my deeper self, my wiser self.
I love it. Well, thank you for sharing. And I don't know, is there anything else you wanted to say that we didn't get to mention?
Well, I had hoped to at some point do a call out for heart-centered gratitude, which I have been immersing myself in lately, thanks to Patricia Wagner's guidance, because I feel like it's an enhancement to bring gratitude into the felt location of the heart is a real enhancement of everything I was already doing. So I just want to slip that in because it's.
And that's something that's very easy to add to a journaling practice, right? Is
the gratitude.
Right? What am I grateful for? And I know from my own personal experience and experience with lots of other people, especially men in prison, that simple practice of journaling gratitude can change everything.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, because it's so easy to focus on what's wrong, especially in the world right now, right? There's so much that we could, where we could put our attention that's negative, that's, just so many things. But, to focus on what you're grateful for.
Exactly.
Brings more into the world. Attention, yes.
What you're paying attention to and what your intention is, and then adding in the feeling and the gratitude and some extra wisdom. It's pretty unbeatable.
It is. Well, Barkley, you're going to join us on Zoom after this?
I am.
that would be wonderful. There may be some people on there that want to talk a little bit more about the process. I mean,
Okay, good.
I don't know. It's great though. We check in with folks, and everybody kind of looks forward to that time together and to picking your brain, asking some questions.
Absolutely.
And I just so appreciate you. This has been so much fun. And
Thank
I
you
want to show
for having
people
me.
again your book. We have a couple of copies at the center.
Oh, good.
Anybody that might want to come by and pick one up. And you will be with us in just a
Excellent.
few minutes.
Thank you, Cindy, very much.
Thank you, my dear. I so appreciate you. And as I said, your encouragement and support over the years. Thank you. See you in a little bit. All right. All right. Well, that was fun. That's such a great process. And I highly recommend it for anyone who's on this journey of self-discovery, whether you've been at it for years and years or you're brand new, that this is just another one of those tools that you can use to tap into your deepest self and the messages that Spirit is wanting to share with you. So it is time for us to talk about our gifts and tithes. Let me see where that is here. Is that this? Nope, wrong thing. Okay. So this is a moment where we just ask for you all to maybe give a love offering, some kind of donation to the center. We appreciate it, and we certainly could use it. Yeah, as we give, we receive. If you want to give friendship, you give friendship. If you want to get love, you give love. If you could use a little more money, then it's great to give money and give it to the place where you feel spiritually fed. And I hope that place is the Center for Spiritual Living. But if it's not, just give someplace. And know that what you give returns back to you, just pressed down, multiplied, overflowing. And so we have many ways for you to give to the Center for Spiritual Living. You could go online and do it through PayPal, or you can go to that telephone number and just text that number from your phone, and you put in the amount that you would like to share with the center, and it goes straight to our bank account. We make it so easy at 352-320-5110. You text and you put in 20, or you put in 200, or even a couple of thousand, whatever you want to give, we'll take it. So now I'll do our prayer, our affirmation. It is the nature of life to give of itself, as it is the tree's nature to bear fruit and the flower's nature to bloom. It is my nature to share the gifts of my time, talent, and treasure. I participate in the divine flow of life, giving generously and receiving abundantly. I am blessed and I am a blessing. I am so grateful. And I will take this moment to just say a prayer for each and every one of you as we take our attention and turn it within for a moment. I am just in such gratitude for Donna, who did our invocation, and Norma, who are traveling, for Richard Jensen, our board president and tech guru, who's in the background, always sharing and caring, and for our guest today, for Barkley Braden, for sharing her wisdom and her insight and this beautiful spiritual practice with each one of you. And I am grateful for our spiritual community, for the support that I receive personally, for the joy, for the sharing, for getting to know so many amazing and wonderful people, and just for knowing that each one of us is a light in this world, and we certainly need for us each to shine our brightest during these days. And so I release these words, just knowing that everyone is safe, that everyone has all that they need, and that each one is a light in their world. And I release these words with joy and with gratitude, knowing that all is unfolding in its perfect and right divine order. And so I will now close out with our prayer for protection and invite you to join us on the Zoom chat. The information for how to get to that Zoom room is on the chat in Facebook, and I think it's on YouTube as well. And so if you want to say this prayer to yourself, it comes from our our brethren over at Unity and James Dillett Freeman, and it is the prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Yes, all is well, and I look forward to seeing some of you on Zoom and hope to see the rest of you next week. Have a great week, everybody.